Welcome to Detective Duo, where classic mysteries come alive, from quiet villages to secret meetings with Tommy and Tuppence themselves. Do remember to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Tommy Beresford had mastered the art of buttering toast with the weary solemnity of a man facing a small but persistent enemy. He had just managed to spread a perfectly even layer, no rips, no crumbs, when the kitchen door burst open as though pushed by a sudden gust of determination rather than wind. Tuppence swept in with the energy of a woman carrying news too important for the usual rules of domestic entry. "Tommy," she declared, thrusting a cream-coloured envelope toward him, as though it were evidence in a particularly dramatic court case. "Explain this." Tommy set the toast down with care, the way one might place down a baby or a bomb. "That," he said mildly, "appears to be a letter." "Oh, don't be obtuse," Tuppence snapped, although she looked more delighted than impatient. She slid into the chair opposite him, eyes bright with anticipation. "Read it." He wiped a spot of butter from his fingers, opened the envelope and unfolded the paper. It was thick, expensive stationery, too nice for a bill and too theatrical for a bank. He cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, you are cordially invited to enjoy a complimentary weekend at the Souci Hotel on the southern coast. Your presence has been specially requested." He stopped. "Requested? By whom?" "That is the question, isn't it?" Tuppence leaned forward. "It's unsigned." Tommy reread the letter, eyebrows pulling into a line of suspicion. "This smells like a promotion. Hotels do this all the time." "Not to us," Tuppence countered, "and certainly not referencing things they shouldn't know anything about." She tapped the page with a flourish. That last line, "Read it." Tommy turned the letter over. "We trust you will find it restful after your previous adventures." He looked up sharply. "Good Lord, what adventures? They can't possibly—" "Oh, but they do," Tuppence said triumphantly, rising from her seat and pacing with that restless stride Tommy always recognized as the herald of impending complications. "Someone knows something they shouldn't, and that means—" She spun, pointing her finger for emphasis. "Mystery." Tommy sighed. The toast had gone cold. "Tuppence," he said, "I would quite like a quiet weekend. You remember quiet weekends? Soft chairs, warm tea, nothing trying to murder us." "Boring," she said promptly. "Besides, this might be nothing more than some eccentric person's idea of flattery, but—" She snatched the letter back from him. "Look here." She held it up to the window. The morning light filtered through the paper, just enough to reveal a faint pencil underline beneath a single phrase. "You must come at once." Tommy blinked. That wasn't visible before. "Exactly," Tuppence said, triumphant. "Someone wanted only the observant to notice it. And who is more observant than us?" "Unfortunately," Tommy muttered. "You're quite right." She dropped into the chair again and reached for her teacup. But just as her fingers curled around the porcelain, her eyes widened slightly, an involuntary flicker of genuine surprise. The cup slipped from her hand, tilting sideways. Tommy lunged forward and caught it just before it could dash itself against the floor. "Good heavens, Tuppence!" he exclaimed. "What now?" But Tuppence wasn't looking at the cup. She wasn't even looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the letter. "There," she breathed. "Do you see it?" Tommy squinted. "See what?" "That phrase, 'you must come at once.' Tommy, that's not merely urgency. That sounds like a warning." Tommy set the teacup down with exaggerated caution. "Or it sounds," he suggested, "like someone very dramatic is trying to entice us to spend money in their hotel." Tuppence gave him a look that suggested his intelligence, charm, and general husbandly credibility were all being quietly reconsidered. No normal hotel would phrase it like that, and no hotel would know about our previous adventures unless someone told them. Which begs the question, who? Tommy sighed, pushing back from the table. "All right," he said. "Let's assume it isn't a promotion. Let's assume it's genuine trouble. Why us?" Tuppence clapped her hands together. "Now you're thinking like a Beresford again. Why us, indeed? We're not exactly ordinary guests, after all." Tommy winced. "A fact I often regret." "But think of it," she said. "It's practically an engraved invitation to investigate, and we mustn't be rude." "There are limits," Tommy said, "to the demands of etiquette. Investigating anonymous summonses seems rather beyond the call of good manners. Well, good manners demand we at least look into it, she insisted. After all, someone has gone to considerable trouble. Tommy folded the letter neatly. You're determined to go. Obviously, he groaned. Then I suppose I must begin packing. Oh, leave that to me, she said, sweeping toward the hallway with purpose. You always pack too sensibly. A weekend at a mysterious seaside hotel requires flair. It requires warm socks, Tommy called after her, and perhaps a sensible jumper. Her voice floated back. Nonsense. What it requires is a coat that makes the right impression. What sort of impression? He asked. One that says, here is a woman ready to uncover secrets. Tommy shook his head and muttered to his cold toast. I should have married someone dull. Too late, came her cheerful reply. He rose and wandered into the sitting room where Tuppence was already examining coats with the solemnity of a general reviewing troops. She held up a navy one. Too discreet. Then a burgundy one. Too festive. Then a dark green coat with a slightly dramatic collar. This one. It says sophistication mixed with just a hint of trouble. Which we seem to find wherever we go, Tommy said. Tuppence smiled at him over the coat's collar. Life's more fun that way. He retrieved their battered suitcase, already imagining the chaos of the journey. Do you think this will really be anything? He asked. Yes, she said instantly. Absolutely. One does not receive anonymous invitations referencing past adventures only to arrive and find everything perfectly ordinary. Perhaps we should hope for ordinary. Tommy, Tuppence said, taking the coat and giving it a satisfied pat. You may hope for it, but we both know you'd be disappointed. He couldn't argue with that. Somewhere under his desire for a peaceful weekend lay the flicker of curiosity, the familiar tug of intrigue. Someone wanted them at the Souci hotel. Someone had underlined a warning. Someone had slipped just enough information to catch their attention. And, Tommy thought as he watched Tuppence bustle about with gleeful efficiency, someone had chosen exactly the right bait. Well then, he said, snapping the suitcase shut, if we must go, let's go properly. Tuppence beamed. Marvellous. We'll catch the afternoon train. That gives us just enough time to prepare. Prepare for what? For whatever awaits us, she said with theatrical mystery. Tommy picked up the letter once more, feeling the faint trace of pencil beneath his thumb. I wish, he murmured, that I could tell whether this note is summoning us to adventure or warning us away from danger. Tuppence slipped her arm through his. Either way, she said gently, we'll face it together. And that, Tommy knew with equal parts comfort and resignation, was precisely why they must go. They left the kitchen, the letter lying on the table between the teacup and the untouched toast, a quiet reminder that their peaceful morning had ended the moment the envelope arrived. Adventure, in the way it always did for them, had tapped politely on their door and walked right in. Tommy's first impression of the Souci hotel was that it looked as though someone had tried to design an elegant seaside retreat while consulting blueprints from several different decades at once. The second impression followed swiftly. The place was trying very hard not to show its age. A revolving door of polished brass spun them into a lobby that smelled of lilies, lemons, and furniture polish applied with a devotion bordering on the religious. Good heavens, Tuppence murmured, pausing to absorb the scene. It's like walking into a play where the actors haven't yet decided which act they're performing. She wasn't wrong. Velvet cushions slumped on faintly faded settees. The chandelier overhead sparkled, though one or two crystals hung lower than they ought, and guests lounged about with the distinct air of people engaged in waiting, waiting to be noticed, waiting for gossip, waiting for something. Tommy's gaze drifted to the reception desk. A clerk stood behind it, tall and thin, spectacles glinting. He had the careful politeness of a man determined not to betray opinions. Good afternoon, the clerk said, folding his hands together. Welcome to the Souci. Reservation for Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, Tommy said. The clerk's eyes flickered just for a second. A spark of recognition, a twitch of unease. Then he forced a professional smile. Of course, yes, we've been expecting you. Have you indeed? Tuppence asked lightly, casting him a look that suggested she noticed everything. The clerk didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he reached for the guest book. Tommy's attention was caught by a woman drifting across the lobby. She was elegant in the way of someone who had learned the art rather than inherited it, Mrs. Montfort, later identified by the clerk. Her pearls hung so heavily around her neck they might have been anchoring her to the floor. She offered the Beresfords a cool nod, the kind bestowed on strangers who might become useful. "We seem to have attracted interest," Tommy murmured. "Naturally," Tuppence replied, eyes scanning. "We're new blood in a place where everyone else looks as though they've been here long enough to form committees." And a few feet away, a man sat at the grand piano with restless hands hovering above the keys. Gregory Vale. He played a soft, meandering tune that faltered every few bars, as though he were expecting someone to interrupt him. His gaze kept darting toward the lobby doors. "Stage nerves," Tommy said under his breath. "Or real nerves," Tuppence replied. Next to the piano, standing with a posture that suggested he was accustomed to admiration, stood Dr. Rowan Kell, charming smile, crisp suit, a man who performed chumminess like an art. He inclined his head at them with just enough warmth to appear friendly and just enough precision to remain inscrutable. "Tuppence," Tommy whispered. "I feel as though we've walked into a casting call." "We have. The question is, what kind of production?" Her answer came almost at once. A figure in a dark coat stepped through the far archway. He was unremarkable in height and build, yet something about him, perhaps the intense stillness, perhaps the watchfulness, marked him instantly. As he passed, his gaze locked onto theirs, not briefly, not politely, a moment too long. "The stranger?" Tommy murmured. "Undoubtedly," Tuppence replied. There was nothing overtly sinister about him, but his attention lingered with an unpleasant weight, as though he were cataloguing them, as though he knew they had come. The clerk finished writing in the book and handed them a key. "Room 12, ground floor. Breakfast is served from 8. "You recognized our names," Tuppence said casually. "Has someone mentioned us?" The clerk hesitated. "Not at all. Merely prepared." "Prepared is an interesting word," she said. He cleared his throat. "I only meant we keep our files in careful order." Files, Tommy thought. On hotel guests? Before they could probe further, a sharp whisper cut across the lobby. Miss Iris Dorling approached like gossip given human form. She wore a hat with too many feathers and leaned in as though bestowing confidences upon new friends. "You must forgive the Souci," she stage whispered. "It has a personality all its own. Some adore it, others find it a shade eccentric." "We rather like eccentric," Tuppence said. "Oh, marvellous." Miss Dorling's eyes darted about, watching for ears. "You'll find the guests terribly interesting. Terribly. Some have secrets, one or two have reputations, and one—" she lowered her voice, "one of them you must avoid." "Which one?" Tommy asked. But Miss Dorling straightened, instantly composed. "You'll soon see." Then she floated away, feathers trembling like excited birds. "Helpfully vague," Tuppence commented. "Suspiciously vague. Deliciously vague." Their room was down a long corridor lined with framed prints of sailing ships. The floorboard beneath the third picture creaked with a note of warning. Tuppence paused. "Old hotels always creak here," Tommy said reassuringly. "Yes," she said thoughtfully, "but some rooms creak more than others." The corridor was empty except for a chambermaid dusting the window ledge. She barely glanced at them, yet her movements slowed ever so slightly when the stranger passed behind them, his coat whispering as he went. Tommy leaned in. "Did you see that?" She stopped cleaning. "She stopped breathing," Tuppence corrected softly. Inside their room they found the usual hotel trappings: neatly made bed, wardrobe, small writing desk, a complimentary brochure showing the Souci at its most flattering angles. But the atmosphere felt different, as though someone had stepped out only moments ago. "You're imagining things," Tommy said. "I'm observing things," she countered. "There's a difference." They set their luggage down. Tommy checked the wardrobe. Empty. He checked the bathroom. Also empty. But neither of them shook the feeling that the room had been inspected recently by someone other than staff. "I suppose," he said, "we should freshen up before dinner." "We should investigate," she corrected, "but dinner will do for a start. It gives us a chance to watch everyone at close range." Tommy reached into his coat pocket for the room key and froze. Something else was there. A crisp fold of paper, slid in so neatly he never would have noticed if it hadn't brushed his knuckle. "Tuppence," he said quietly. Look." He unfolded it. The handwriting was narrow, precise, almost unnervingly calm. "Do not trust the one who greets you last." They stared at the words, then at each other. "The stranger?" Tommy suggested. "No," Tuppence said slowly. "He didn't greet us. He merely stared. The last person who spoke to us was—" They looked toward the door, toward the empty corridor outside. "The clerk," Tuppence whispered. Tommy slipped the note into his pocket. "We're not alone here." "No," she agreed. "We've been expected." And somewhere in the hotel, among the faded velvet, polished brass, and eccentric guests, someone already knew exactly why they'd come. "Tommy," Tuppence declared, hands on hips, "if we unpack before exploring, we'll lose the element of freshness. Investigation thrives on freshness." Tommy, who had unbuttoned precisely one shirt to hang in the wardrobe, gave her a resigned smile. "Heaven forbid we deprive a mystery of its freshness." She seized his arm. "Come on, at least a tour, a small one, a harmless one." "Those words," Tommy said, following her out into the corridor, "have never once applied to anything you have led me into." The Souci's long hallway was unusually still. The framed sailing ships seemed to watch them with nautical disapproval as they passed. A chambermaid hurried by with her head lowered, the feather duster trembling faintly in her grip. Tuppence noted it. "Nervous servants," she whispered, "always a sign." Or she saw the state of our luggage and assumed we'd demand ironing. But even Tommy felt the tension humming beneath the hotel's surface, as though something inside the walls was holding its breath. They wandered first into the reading room, a handsome space with tall windows and a curiously uneven row of armchairs. One of them rocked slightly, even without anyone sitting in it, as if remembering some earlier disturbance. Guests murmured to one another in low tones. A stout man in a tweed jacket was complaining about the quality of the newspapers. A pair of sisters with identical spectacles discussed whether the hotel cat was a ghost or merely aloof, and Miss Dorling perched nearby, pretending to read while listening to everyone. Tuppence whispered, "If she ever becomes bored, society will have to shut down entirely." Tommy shushed her, though he smiled. They drifted through the lounge next. Gregory Vale was at the piano again, playing something so tentative it sounded as though the notes themselves were frightened. He would lift his hands, freeze, glance at the doors, then resume a different chord. Tuppence leaned to Tommy. "Either he's writing a masterpiece or hiding something." "Or tone-deaf," Tommy offered. But Vale's trembling hand suggested nerves, not incompetence. They were about to slip into the Palm Court corridor, a long glass-roofed passage lined with ferns and wicker chairs, when Tommy halted abruptly. "Tuppence," he whispered. "Do you hear that?" She held up a hand. Behind a half-closed door just ahead, two voices were whispering urgently, not the relaxed conversation of guests. A different tone entirely. Tight, pressed, hurried. They crept closer, though Tommy's left shoe squeaked faintly on the polished tile. Tuppence shot him a scandalized look. "It wasn't intentional," Tommy mouthed. "Try walking less like a startled duck," she mouthed back. They paused by the door. The words became clearer. "Before he talks." A second voice responded, sharper, coloured by panic. "He won't get the chance." "What about the couple from London?" "Doesn't matter. They're irrelevant." "No one is irrelevant." "Stop arguing. It will have to be tonight." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a glance. Tonight. There was the slightest rustle, the faintest click of something, perhaps a drawer or a suitcase clasp. Then footsteps. Tuppence grabbed Tommy's sleeve and pulled him backward into the shadow of a palm. She held her breath. The door swung open. Light spilled into the corridor. But no one came out. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. Tommy peered around the palm. The room was empty. "Impossible," he murmured. "They were just there." "Not impossible," Tuppence corrected softly. "Merely inconvenient. There must be another exit." But why whisper by this door at all if they had another way out? "To be overheard by the right people," she said, "or to be overheard by the wrong ones." He considered that. "You think they knew we'd stop here?" "I think we underestimate our own predictability." She stepped inside the empty room. It held nothing but a pair of armchairs, a floor lamp, and a small table with a neglected stack of magazines. The curtains at the opposite end fluttered slightly. Tommy pulled them aside. A second door, a connecting passage. "And they're long gone," he said. Tuppence nodded. "But the key question is, Were they discussing the stranger or someone else entirely? Tommy placed a hand on the table. A thin layer of dust coated it, except for one small, circular patch where something had recently rested. "A glass," he murmured. "Still warm." Tuppence pressed her fingertips to the spot. "Someone left in a hurry." They returned to the corridor. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "This place is buzzing with secrets, Tommy. Most of which I would be very happy to ignore." "Nonsense, we're here now." They moved back toward the lounge, hoping to observe some telling interaction, but the atmosphere had shifted again. Guests who had been murmuring idly earlier now seemed tenser. Mrs. Montfort sat near the fire, clutching her handbag as though defending national treasure. Miss Dorling watched Gregory Vale at the piano with unusual stillness. Dr. Rowan Kell leaned against the mantel, his casual smile somewhat fixed. Into this tableau stepped the stranger. He moved quietly but with purpose, like a man accustomed to slipping through spaces unnoticed until it suited him not to. His coat brushed Tuppence's sleeve as he passed. Without looking at her, he said in a low murmur, "You shouldn't have come." Tuppence froze. Tommy spun around, but the stranger was already halfway across the lounge, speaking to Gregory Vale in a calm, friendly tone. So calm it belied the warning he had just delivered. "Did you see that?" Tommy whispered. "Every second," Tuppence said. "We mustn't approach him yet, not until we know who else is watching." "You think he's being followed?" "I think everyone here is following everyone." Before Tommy could reply, the stranger placed a hand on the piano, leaned down to say something to Vale, and then drifted away again, fading into the next room like smoke. "And we're not supposed to have come," Tommy said. "Charming." "On the contrary," Tuppence replied, "it implies we're terribly important." "That," Tommy said, "is not a comfort." They circled the lounge once more. Tommy took note of Mrs. Montfort's trembling fingers. Tuppence noticed the clerk lingering at the doorway, expression blank but eyes alert. Gregory Vale seemed on the verge of fainting or fleeing. Dr. Kell's attention sharpened when the stranger exited. "These people," Tuppence whispered, "are dancing around secrets like moths around a candle." "Let's hope none of them get burned." As they made their way back through the Palm Court corridor, Tuppence reached for her coat. She'd draped it over a wicker chair earlier. Her hand paused. "Tommy," she said softly, "this wasn't here before." She held up a folded hotel brochure. Plain, unremarkable, but tucked into the crease was a torn corner, missing from its top right edge. Tommy frowned. "Someone put that in your pocket?" "It wasn't in my pocket," she said. "It was tucked into the lining of my coat." "Then who—" She stopped. Her gaze drifted to the wicker chair she'd briefly sat beside while watching Vale at the piano. A single torn scrap of glossy paper lay under it. Tommy bent and picked it up. It matched perfectly. "The stranger was sitting right there," Tuppence whispered, "right next to this chair." Tommy fit the torn piece to the missing corner. "A message?" "A clue," she said. "Left by someone who wants to help us, or someone who wants to lure us." He handed her the brochure. "Which do you think it is?" Tuppence folded it carefully. "I think," she said, "that the stranger is trying to speak to us, but can't risk being seen." "And the others?" "Some of them," she said, glancing back down the corridor, "are planning something that must happen tonight." Tommy straightened. "Then we'd better be ready." Tuppence slipped the reconstructed brochure into her coat. "Ready?" she said. "My dear Tommy, we were ready the moment that letter arrived." The first sound that greeted Tommy and Tuppence as they entered the dining room was the crisp, almost theatrical clink of silver on china. It was a musical sort of sound, but not comforting. It felt rehearsed, as though the diners in the Souci Hotel played at civility the way actors played at dinner scenes, with precision, caution, and just enough tension to keep the audience watching. The room itself was a gleaming spectacle. White tablecloths pressed within an inch of their lives, candles set in glass holders that threw trembling light across polished cutlery, and a scattering of guests whose expressions suggested they were all performing the role of themselves. "Observe," Tuppence murmured, scanning the room. "A congregation of secrets pretending to enjoy soup." Tommy smiled despite himself. "Let's hope no one chokes on intrigue before the entree." A waiter guided them to a table near the centre, strategically positioned so they could see nearly everyone and nearly everyone could see them. Tuppence noticed this at once. "Intentional," she whispered. "Someone wants to watch us." "Then let's be entertaining." They had barely settled when Miss Iris Dorling floated into the seat to Tuppence's right, feathers rustling as though eager to eavesdrop on themselves. "My dears," she breathed, "such excitement in the air tonight." "Is there?" Tuppence asked lightly. "Of course there is. One can always tell when something's about to happen. Silences get heavier. Footsteps get quieter. People glance at doorways more often. Very telling indicators." Tuppence passed her the breadbasket. "And what, pray, do the indicators tell you this evening?" Miss Dorling's lips curled knowingly. "That someone here knows you, or believes they do." "Half-truths again," Tuppence said, tone sweet. "You're a menace." Miss Dorling affected modesty. "I only observe." Loudly, Tommy added. While Miss Dorling laughed, Tommy's attention shifted to the table beside theirs. Dr. Rowan Kell, immaculate in a charcoal suit, raised his glass in a polite greeting. He had the unmistakable air of a man who collected impressions the way others collected stamps. "Mind if I join you?" he asked smoothly. "Not at all," Tommy replied. "We were hoping to meet the Souci's resident charmer." Dr. Kell smiled. "You've been speaking with Miss Dorling, I see." "Only to confirm that we've arrived at a most interesting moment," Tuppence said. "Your hotel seems lively." "Lively?" Kell repeated. I might have chosen a different word." "Which word would that be?" Tommy asked. He stirred his soup with deliberate leisure. "Sensitive." Tuppence arched an eyebrow. "Sensitive?" "Hotels like this," he said, "accumulate stories. Old grievances, old rivalries, old mistakes. Sometimes they resurface. It's to be expected." "Are these the little troubles we've heard about?" Tommy asked casually. Kell's spoon halted mid-stir. He recovered almost instantly. "Ah, Miss Dorling has been talking. She exaggerates. Any troubles the Souci has faced are trivial." His evasiveness was too polished, too careful. Tuppence made a mental note. Further down the room, Mrs. Montfort sat at her table like a marble bust of a queen in exile. Her pearl necklace, heavy enough to double as a weapon, glistened under the candlelight, but her true fixation was the velvet handbag in her lap. She held it in both hands, fingers curled around it protectively, as though it contained something priceless or dangerous. "Something's in that bag," Tuppence whispered. "Perhaps her knitting," Tommy said. "Tommy," she replied witheringly, "she is not the knitting sort." They ate through the first course, then the second, all the while observing. The atmosphere shifted with each new arrival, each new conversation, each glance exchanged. It was like watching the gears of a clock turning, silent, deliberate, purposeful. Then, as the third course was served, Tommy spotted him. The stranger. He sat alone at the far end of the room, in a seat that offered him full view of every exit. His dinner lay mostly untouched. His posture was tense, shoulders drawn slightly forward, eyes scanning the room with quick, precise movements. "Poor man," Tuppence murmured. "He looks like a cat waiting for a trap to spring." "Or the mouse," Tommy suggested. "Hard to tell." Tuppence watched him carefully. He did not eat. He did not drink. He barely moved. He simply observed and waited. Halfway through the meal, he abruptly rose. Tommy stiffened. Tuppence's fork paused in mid-air. The stranger walked quietly along the path between tables, his coat brushing past chairbacks. He approached their table without looking at them directly. His hand reached out in a swift, practiced movement, so quick that only Tuppence caught it. A small matchbox slid onto her plate. He didn't break pace, didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the action. He simply passed behind them and continued walking, exiting the dining room through the side door. Tommy stared at the matchbox. "Well," he said softly, "that's not something one sees at most dinners." Tuppence opened it with a steady hand. Inside was a torn scrap of paper on which someone had written, in cramped, hurried script, "They are watching me. I will speak in the winter garden at 11. Tuppence folded the paper immediately, slipping it into her napkin. Tommy's gaze flicked around the room. No one seemed to have noticed, except Dr. Kell, whose eyes narrowed ever so slightly before returning to his plate. "Well," Tuppence whispered, "that settles it." He's either desperate or dramatic. Possibly both, Tommy replied. Do we go? Of course we go. But separately, he said. If we're being watched, we mustn't arrive together. She nodded. At 11, I'll leave first. Be careful, she smiled. I always am. That, he said, is provably false. Tuppence turned back to her food, but her focus had shifted entirely. Miss Dorling leaned in immediately, curiosity radiating from her. My dear, you look positively enchanted. Has someone told you a secret? Not yet, Tuppence said, but I expect they will very soon. Miss Dorling's feathers quivered. Clearly she was dying to pry open every lid in the room. Further down, Mrs. Montfort's grip on her handbag tightened as the waiter set down dessert. She looked around with jittery indecision. Was she guarding something, or hiding it from someone else? Tommy's attention was caught by Gregory Vale. The pianist had abandoned his seat and stood by the wall, staring at the door through which the stranger had vanished. His face had gone pale. Vale knows something, Tommy murmured. Tuppence followed his gaze. Yes, but whether he's an ally or a threat, hard to say. Dr. Kell dabbed his lips with a napkin. Well, he said lightly, this evening has been full of interesting company. Do enjoy the rest of your meal. He rose, bowed slightly, and left, but not before his eyes flickered once more toward Tuppence's napkin. The candlelight around them seemed to flicker more nervously now. Conversations grew stilted, glances sharper. The Souci's genteel charm had twisted itself into something taut, wound so tight it might snap at any moment. When the final course ended, Tommy leaned closer. We'll need to slip away without drawing attention. Tuppence dipped her head. I'll go at 10:40, you follow at 10:55. He touched her hand briefly under the table. If anything looks wrong, I'll know, she said. They rose slowly, avoiding any sudden movements. Miss Dorling watched them with shameless interest. Mrs. Montfort clutched her handbag tighter. Gregory Vale's fingers twitched at his side. The clerk at the doorway observed them with the indifference of a man reading a newspaper headline he already knew. But only one pair of eyes truly mattered, the stranger's, and he was nowhere to be seen. As they stepped into the corridor, Tuppence exhaled softly. A winter garden at 11, she said. It's practically an engraved invitation to trouble. Tommy pocketed the matchbox. Fortunately, he replied, we seem to specialize in trouble. Tuppence arrived in the winter garden at precisely 10:58, though she made the entrance look entirely accidental, as if she had merely wandered in hopes of admiring the orchids before bed. She paused by a tall pot of white blossoms, tilting her head with exaggerated appreciation. They're lovely, aren't they? She murmured aloud, speaking to no one in particular, but ensuring anyone listening would assume innocence. The winter garden stretched before her like a conservatory preserved from another era. Tiled floors in a mosaic pattern, rows of palms arching overhead, wicker chairs positioned in conversational pairs, and the faint smell of damp earth that clung to the air even this late. A row of electric lanterns cast a gentle glow, softened by their frosted glass casings. It felt peaceful. False peace was something Tuppence had a nose for. She moved slowly, deliberately, her gloved hand tracing the edge of the orchid pot. She could sense motion somewhere to her left, faint, controlled, like someone shifting weight between steps rather than approaching. "Tommy?" she murmured softly. Nothing. Of course not. Tommy was somewhere behind the ferns near the back entrance, positioned exactly as planned, watching, listening, ready to intervene just enough to keep her safe, but far enough not to deter the stranger from speaking freely. A shadow detached itself from the far wall. Tuppence's spine straightened. "You came," the stranger whispered. He stepped into the light in a narrow sliver, not enough for his full face to be seen, but enough for Tuppence to glimpse his eyes. They darted everywhere, scanning the pathways, the exits, the windows. His coat hung from him as though it had been tugged violently earlier, one sleeve slightly twisted. Tuppence kept her tone calm. "You asked us to." "No," he replied. "I warned you." His voice had a rasp to it now, as if he had been speaking in hushed tones for hours. He moved closer, still keeping half his body in the shadow. "I've been hiding here," he said. "Here, in the Souci." Tuppence folded her hands neatly in front of her. "Why? And from whom?" He looked toward the doorway, then back at her. Someone in this hotel is trying to silence me. Someone, she echoed, or more than one? His jaw tightened. I don't know how many anymore, but I know it started with one. Tuppence's heartbeat quickened, though her posture remained perfectly composed. Who? The stranger hesitated. I shouldn't say. Not yet. I thought... He swallowed. I thought you could help me. We can, Tuppence said gently, but we need to know what you've done, or discovered, that makes you a target. The stranger pressed a hand to his temple. I don't have much time. They've been watching me since last night. They know I spoke to the pianist. They know I tried to leave. Why didn't you? He gave a hollow laugh. Because someone cut off the line to the local taxi service, and when I tried the road on foot, a car followed me. No lights, just the engine. Tuppence felt a cold thread wind itself down her spine. So, you came back? I had to, he said. This place is a trap, but it's one I can navigate. I know its corners, its blind spots, its hiding places. Tuppence leaned in. And why us? Why contact us? You underlined your message. You sought us deliberately. His eyes flickered. Because you've solved things. Because you notice things other people miss. I've been following your cases for years. I thought... A sharp sound sliced through his words, glass shattering. It echoed off the tile and the palms, ringing out with unnatural precision. A deliberate sound. Tuppence gasped softly. Tommy! I heard. His voice came from the shadows. Calm, controlled, ready. The stranger flinched backward. No, no. This is wrong. This is... The lanterns flickered. Not once. Twice. And then... For the briefest moment, the winter garden was plunged into dimness, the shadows thick enough to hide 3 men if needed. Tuppence took a step forward. Wait. The light snapped back on. The stranger was gone. Not moved. Not hidden. Gone. Tuppence whirled around, scanning every corner. Tommy emerged from behind the ferns, jaw clenched. He didn't pass me, Tommy said. I swear it. Tuppence pointed toward the place where the stranger had stood. Look. Footprints, clear, distinct impressions in the thin dusting of soil that had been tracked from one of the potted palms. They led forward 2 steps, then stopped, completely. No smudging, no drag marks, no turning prints, as though the stranger had vanished mid-stride. Tommy knelt beside the last print, brow furrowing. This makes no sense. Someone must have dragged him, Tuppence insisted. Tommy shook his head. Not without leaving more prints, or scuffing the soil, and we would have heard it. Unless, she said slowly, there's a door we missed. He looked up. A hidden one? Or a staff one? Tommy stood and scanned the wall behind the palms. Nothing but a row of decorative tiles and a low ledge. No sign of a door, he muttered. The winter garden suddenly felt too quiet, too hollow, the kind of silence that arrived only after something had been removed from a room. Tuppence's voice trembled despite her best effort. Tommy, he was terrified. Yes, Tommy said, but terrified people don't simply dematerialize. They began a meticulous search of the winter garden. Tommy tested the tiles for hollow spaces. Tuppence examined the palm pots, searching for scratch marks or signs of disturbance. They circled the entire conservatory twice. Nothing. When they returned to the mosaic floor, the footprints were still there, ending sharply at a polished tile as smooth as glass. Someone knew we'd be here, Tuppence whispered. Someone intercepted him. And used the darkness to cover it, Tommy added grimly. A sudden voice made them both jump. Excuse me? A waiter stood in the archway, face pale, hands gripping a tray he hadn't realized he still held. Sir, madam, this room shouldn't be in use after 10. Tommy straightened. We were told... Oh no, the waiter interrupted hastily. Not by staff. It's strictly closed after hours. For safety. Maintenance. Tuppence's voice sharpened. Has someone else been in here tonight? The waiter shook his head quickly. No, it should be locked. The night porter usually checks. Tommy glanced at Tuppence. Locked? Yes, the waiter said. Always. He stepped further in, scanning the floor. Did you hear something break? Possibly a vase, Tuppence said lightly. Hard to tell. The waiter looked deeply uneasy. If you need anything, please ring from your room. I must go. He hurried off, nearly tripping over his own feet. Tommy watched him leave. Nervous. "Or covering something," Tuppence responded. They exited the winter garden quietly, each listening for footsteps beyond the corridor or the faintest shift of movement behind a door. Nothing. They reached their room without incident. Tommy closed the door behind them. This place is turning into a maze of half-truths. Tuppence moved to the desk. Something lay on the floor beneath it, a thin edge of white peeking out just enough to catch the light. "Tommy!" Her voice was faint. She bent, pulled the folded paper free and unfolded it. One line, written with the same cramped urgency as the previous message. "You must leave before it is too late." Tommy exhaled slowly. Not exactly subtle. Tuppence pressed the paper flat on the desk. "He wanted us to help him. He said someone here was trying to silence him, and now he's disappeared." "Not vanished," Tommy said grimly. "Removed. And now they're warning us away." Tommy looked at her. "Do we leave?" Tuppence met his gaze. Her eyes were bright with the fire he knew all too well, the fire of curiosity sharpened by danger. "We can't," she said. "Not now. Not when someone dragged him away under our noses. Not when this hotel is crawling with secrets." Tommy nodded slowly. "I was afraid you'd say that." She placed the message on the bedside table. "Someone here knows exactly who we are. Someone wanted us here for a reason." "And someone else," Tommy said quietly, "desperately wants us gone." Tuppence straightened. "Then we stay, and we find him." Tommy closed the curtains with a firm tug. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin searching this hotel properly." Tuppence smiled despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Yes," she whispered, "tomorrow." But the night outside pressed heavily against the window, as though the walls themselves wished to warn them. They were already in too deep. Tuppence woke with the unmistakable feeling that something had shifted. Not in the room. The curtains hung as neatly as she'd drawn them. The teacup on the desk still sat where she'd placed it the night before, but in the hotel itself. A sort of hush had settled over the Souci, the kind of hush that arrives only when everyone is trying desperately not to talk about something. Tommy was already buttoning his shirt. "I've been thinking," he said gravely, "that disappearing footprints ought to be reviewed with the same seriousness as disappearing butlers. Both rarely bode well." Tuppence sat up. "We need to find him, Tommy. He didn't just run away. That shattering glass wasn't coincidence." "No," Tommy agreed. "Someone wanted to distract us." They dressed quickly and made their way to the lobby. Morning light glimmered on the polished reception counter, and the clerk stood behind it with his usual stiff posture. He looked up as they approached, and didn't smile. "Good morning," Tuppence said pleasantly. "We'd like to inquire about a guest." The clerk straightened. "Of course. How may I assist?" "We're trying to locate the man who arrived just before us yesterday afternoon," she said. "Dark coat, kept to himself, rather nervous disposition." The clerk blinked. "I'm afraid no such gentleman is registered with us." Tuppence tilted her head. "Perhaps you're mistaken. He was at dinner last night." "I assure you, madam, all our guests are accounted for. If he spoke with you, he must have been visiting someone." "Did he leave a name at all?" Tommy asked. "No, sir." He answered too quickly. Tuppence leaned casually on the counter. "May I see the ledger?" The clerk hesitated. "I don't normally—" "Oh, but you have such lovely handwriting," she said sweetly. "I simply must admire it." Flustered, he fetched the guest ledger, opening it on the counter. The list glowed under the morning light, names written in neat, sharp strokes. Mrs. Montfort, Dr. Rowan Kell, Gregory Vale, Iris Dorling, several couples, a retired colonel, but no stranger. Tuppence flipped a page, then another. Then she stopped. Between yesterday morning's page and yesterday afternoon's was a gap. A faint line of rough fibre marked where a page had been torn out entirely. She said lightly, "Your ink has bled a little here." The clerk leaned forward defensively. "Humidity, madam. These old ledgers are delicate." Tommy murmured, "Delicate, yes, but not usually so delicate they lose entire pages." The clerk froze, then forced a thin smile. "If there is nothing else—" "There is," Tuppence said. "Breakfast." They stepped away before he could react further. Tommy led the way toward the winter garden. The corridor was empty except for a single maid carrying towels, who looked away quickly when she spotted them. The conservatory felt different in daylight, less mysterious, more melancholy. The palms cast gentle shadows on the tiled mosaic floor. "Look," Tommy said, kneeling by the spot where the stranger had stood. "The footprints are gone." Tuppence frowned. "Wiped clean." "Except," Tommy pointed to a faint scuff on a nearby tile, "someone dragged something heavy across here." "Or someone," she said softly. They continued searching. Under a wicker chair, Tommy's hand brushed something small and hard. He held it up between two fingers. A button, black, shiny, monogrammed with the letters AC. Tuppence leaned in. "That's not from any staff uniforms." "No," Tommy agreed. "The stranger's coat had buttons like these. I noticed at dinner." He pocketed it and continued scanning. Near one of the potted palms, he crouched again. "What is it?" she asked. He held up a strip of torn fabric. Dark grey, wool. "Matches his coat exactly." Tuppence's breath caught. Then he was here, and someone dragged him. She glanced around the conservatory. The staff exit on the left was locked. The main entrance behind them was empty. The side corridor was silent. "It happened fast," Tommy murmured. "Fast and quiet. And right under our noses." They returned to the lounge where the morning routine of the Souci had resumed, or tried to. A few guests lingered over newspapers. Others stared blankly into coffee cups. Tuppence began with Mrs. Montfort. She approached the widow gently. "Forgive the intrusion, Mrs. Montfort, but I wondered if you recall speaking with a gentleman here. Dark coat, rather pale, seemed anxious." Mrs. Montfort stiffened, clutching her handbag. "I most certainly do. He asked me for money." Her lips tightened. "I told him I do not fund strangers. He was quite persistent." "Threatening?" Tuppence asked. "Nearly so," Mrs. Montfort sniffed. "I was relieved when he walked away." Tuppence thanked her and moved on to the pianist. Gregory Vale sat at the piano bench without playing, his shoulders hunched as though trying to fold into himself. Tuppence approached softly. "Mr. Vale, may we speak?" He nodded quickly. Yes, of course, but I don't know anything more, truly." "We haven't asked anything yet," Tuppence said gently. Vale swallowed. "He told me he was in danger, last night, before dinner. He said someone was following him." "Did he say who?" "No." Vale's hands trembled. "But he looked so frightened. I think he meant it." Tuppence observed him closely. There was real fear in his posture, not performance. "Thank you," she said. Miss Dorling found them next, or rather, swept toward them, as though carried by a conspiratorial breeze. "My dears," she whispered, "you're asking after that man, aren't you?" Tuppence smiled. "You noticed?" "My hobby is noticing." Miss Dorling lowered her voice. "He was a trickster, a swindler. Everyone saw it. The sort who flatters, then borrows, then vanishes. I warned Mrs. Montfort, but she insisted on speaking with him anyway." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "Did he attempt to swindle you?" Miss Dorling laughed sharply. "He wouldn't dare." "You're sure?" "Entirely. Those sorts know their prey." The tone held finality, but Tuppence noted the overconfidence. People lied most easily when convinced of their cleverness. Finally, they turned to Dr. Rowan Kell. He looked up from his newspaper, smiling with only half his mouth. "Still investigating?" "We simply want to understand who he was," Tommy said. "Dangerous," Kell replied calmly. "You knew him?" Tuppence asked. "Not personally." Kell folded his paper. "But I recognized the type. Restless, watching doors, mind darting like a misfired engine. That's not nerves, that's guilt." "Guilt about what?" Tommy asked. Kell shrugged. "Something. Everything. Nothing. Hard to say." He offered no more. Tuppence whispered as they walked away. 4 people, 4 stories. "And all different," Tommy said. "That's useful." "Or confusing." "Both." Back in their room, Tommy made a beeline for the telephone. "Last night he said someone cut off his chance to leave by calling for a taxi," Tommy muttered. "So let's see if ours works." He picked up the receiver. Nothing. Not a dial tone, not static. Dead silence. Tuppence looked up sharply. "That's not the hotel's doing." "No," Tommy said. "Someone removed the line." He inspected the back of the phone box. A tiny screw lay on the floor. The cord had been tugged loose just enough to disconnect. Not damaged, not cut, only disabled. "Tuppence," he said slowly. "Someone was in our room." She swallowed. "While we were at dinner? Or while we were in the winter garden?" She sat down on the bed. The weight of everything pressed in around them. Tommy spoke softly. "He chose us, because he thought we could help. He must have seen something he shouldn't have." Tuppence looked down at her hands. "Every guest describes him differently, every version more convenient than the last." "And none of them," Tommy added, "describe a man who should vanish overnight." She stood and walked to the window, staring at the manicured lawn below. "If all these people dislike him so much," she whispered, voice tight with dawning certainty, "perhaps one of them made sure he disappeared." Tommy joined her, placing a steady hand on her arm. "We'll find out," he said, "and we'll find him." But Tuppence didn't answer, because in that moment she realized something chilling. Someone didn't just want the stranger gone. Someone didn't want them asking questions either. The west wing of the Souci had the uncanny mood of a place nobody wished to be caught walking through. Even the air felt stiller than in the rest of the hotel, as though the carpets absorbed sound more greedily. The wallpaper muted footsteps on purpose. Tommy and Tuppence paused at the corner where the main hallway split. "This is the sort of corridor where governesses see ghosts," Tommy murmured. "This is the sort of corridor," Tuppence corrected, "where people hide things they shouldn't." They moved quietly past the guest rooms. Most doors were ajar, cleaners moving briskly through morning routines, beds turned down, windows opened for fresh air, laundry carts rumbling softly. But the end of the wing was different. The corridor narrowed, the carpet darkened, and the last door sat firmly shut. Tuppence slowed. "There," Tommy frowned. "Storage room?" "So they say. But which storage room needs its own particular shade of secrecy?" As they approached, a maid turned the corner, carrying linen. She startled when she saw them. "Oh, good morning, sir, madam," Tuppence smiled. "Lovely morning. We're exploring." The maid tightened her grip on the linens. "There's nothing down here for guests." "Nothing at all?" Tuppence asked innocently. "Only the storage room." The maid gestured vaguely toward the final door. "May we look?" Tuppence asked sweetly. "Oh no," the maid replied immediately. "It's only old furniture, not safe, dusty." Tommy exchanged a sharp glance with Tuppence. Dusty, yet the handle gleamed faintly, polished by recent touch. "Could you open it for us?" Tuppence asked. The maid shook her head. "I have cleaning to do." Tuppence tapped her chin. "But surely it's no trouble. You have the keys." The maid flinched at the mention of keys. The ring at her hip jingled softly as she shifted nervously. She placed the linen cart between herself and the door, as though guarding it. Tommy stepped forward, friendly but firm. "It would help settle a question for us." The maid looked torn. I'm not supposed to." Tuppence smiled. "Then we won't tell if you won't." The maid's eyes darted to the key ring. She touched several keys, but her fingers hesitated, deliberately avoiding one particular key, a small brass one nestled between two larger iron ones. Tommy watched the motion carefully. "That one," he said quietly. "Isn't it?" The maid jerked her hand away. "No, that's for the boiler room." "Is it?" Tuppence said gently. The maid dropped the keys altogether. They jingled as they hit her hip, a tiny metallic confession. "I must go," she said quickly. "Breakfast service is beginning. Excuse me." And she fled down the hall. Tuppence's smile faded. "Well, that tells us everything." "Indeed," Tommy said. "I almost feel guilty." "Don't. She was lying to protect someone." Tuppence glanced both directions down the corridor. Empty. "Right," she whispered. "We need a distraction." "You have something in mind?" "I always do." Within minutes, Tuppence had accomplished what few women could claim. She made a hotel maid drop everything and run to the lobby. A loud, strategic call for help. "I think Mrs. Montfort fainted," echoed down the corridor, and the moment the maid rushed off, Tommy produced a thin wire he kept for emergencies. Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "Where did you get that?" "Standard gentleman's accessory," Tommy replied. "Useful for picnic baskets, jam drawers, and investigative endeavours." He inserted the wire into the keyhole. Years of occasional mischief, wartime service, and the occasional locked attic had given Tommy respectable skill. The lock clicked in seconds. Tuppence beamed. "You're wasted on civilian life." "Don't tell the government," he said, and pushed the door open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn tight. As Tommy flicked on the light, motes of dust danced in the sudden brightness. "Storage room," Tuppence murmured. "Yes, full of classic storage items, bed sheets, broken chairs, and a recently slept-in bed." Because it was unmistakable. The bed on the right side of the room was unmade. Creased sheets, a pillow with the distinct dip left by a head, even the faint indentation of knees where someone had sat. Not dusty, not unused, recent. Tommy approached it. He was here. Tuppence moved toward the small fireplace at the far end, where a faint trail of ash led from the grate to the rug. She knelt and reached into the ashes gingerly. A charred fragment of paper surfaced, edges blackened but some lines still legible. "Tuppence." She read it aloud softly. "The Souci, not safe. Know what I discovered. Document hidden. Before they reach me." Tommy exhaled. He tried to burn it, or someone tried to burn his message. Tuppence turned the fragment over. He must have been interrupted. On the desk nearby sat a small suitcase, brown leather, scuffed, with its luggage labels carefully cut away. She opened it. Inside were only a shirt, an old razor, and a folded newspaper. No identifying marks, no name. Tommy picked up the newspaper. 3 days old. Tuppence found a slip of paper under it, an invoice on hotel stationery. "A bill," she said, "for 5 nights, not paid, not signed." Tommy shook his head. "The clerk said he wasn't registered at all. And yet, here is his bill." She placed it on the desk. They erased him. As they searched further, Tommy paused suddenly. "Do you smell that?" Tuppence sniffed. "Tobacco. Fresh." Tommy knelt by the bedside table. A match lay on the floor. Someone had lit a cigarette recently. Someone with trembling hands, judging by the split wood. "He was here this morning," Tommy said quietly. "Hours ago, before they moved him." Tuppence straightened. "Which means they'll realize soon enough that we've been here too." They replaced everything exactly where they'd found it, closed the suitcase and smoothed the sheets. Tuppence brushed the ash trail back toward the grate. "We mustn't let whoever hid this room know we've seen it," she said. "Not yet. Not until we know why." Tommy locked the door behind them and placed the key gently back on its hook on the maid's abandoned cart. He turned. Tuppence froze. A figure stood 10 feet away. Dr. Rowan Kell. He leaned lightly against the wall, arms folded, as though he had been waiting for some time. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. Tommy felt the hairs on his neck rise. "Doctor, off exploring, are you?" Dr. Kell smiled. "I was on my way to check the west exit. These corridors can be dreadfully confusing, you know." Tuppence's eyes flicked discreetly to the door of the locked room. "Can they?" "Oh yes," Kell said. "One can take a wrong turn at any moment." There was something just a shade too knowing in his tone, something too measured in his gaze. Tommy stepped slightly in front of Tuppence. "We should get to breakfast." "Of course," Kell said smoothly. "Enjoy it. I hear the kippers are excellent." He walked past them, not hurriedly but not slowly either, just precisely the pace of a man who wanted to appear casual and succeeded by sheer will. Tuppence waited until he turned the corner. Then she whispered, "He wasn't lost." "No," Tommy said. "He was listening, or following." "And waiting," she added softly. "For us." Tommy nodded. A lie, neatly unlocked. They returned to their room, closed the door, and sat together by the small writing desk. Tuppence laid out the recovered clues. The torn letter, the unsigned bill, the stripped suitcase, the smell of fresh tobacco, the concealed room. Tommy leaned back. He was hiding in that room, it's obvious. "Yes," Tuppence said, tapping her fingers thoughtfully. "But someone else knew he was there, someone who wanted him kept out of sight." "And someone powerful enough," Tommy added, "to erase his name from the ledger." Tuppence considered this. Miss Dorling said he was a trickster. Vale said he was in danger. Mrs. Montfort said he begged for money. Kell said he recognized the type. And none of these versions align. "No," she said, "but all of them are convenient." Tommy frowned. "Convenient to whom?" She looked up slowly. To someone who wanted every guest to distrust him, to dismiss him, to discredit anything he might say. Tommy exhaled sharply. So when he disappeared, no one would care. Tuppence's voice was barely audible as she finished the thought, and no one would interfere. She stood and paced the room. Someone hid his room, someone removed him, someone made him invisible in every way but to us. Tommy watched her, seeing the conclusion form in her eyes. "Tuppence," he said carefully. "Who?" She stopped at the window, her silhouette rigid. "Someone in this hotel," she whispered, "knows exactly what he discovered." Tommy joined her at the window. "And now," she said, "they know we're discovering it too." The Souci's morning coffee service was usually a sedate affair, but today the atmosphere simmered with the nervous energy of a room full of people pretending to read newspapers while secretly watching one another. Silver spoons clinked a little too sharply. Pages were turned with a little too much force. Conversations ended abruptly the moment someone new approached, and Mrs. Montfort looked as though she had hardly slept. Tuppence fixed her in her sights the moment she and Tommy entered the lounge. The widow sat rigidly in an overstuffed armchair, her velvet handbag balanced protectively on her knees. Her pearls, those heavy, defiant pearls, seemed to weigh down not just her neck but her entire demeanour. Tuppence approached with a gentle, disarming smile. "Mrs. Montfort, may I join you?" The widow blinked, surprised. "Mrs. Beresford? Yes, of course." Her fingers clutched the handbag tighter. "Is there news? Has someone been found?" Her voice trembled slightly on that last word. Tuppence noted it. "I was hoping," Tuppence said softly, "that you might help me understand what's happening here." Mrs. Montfort flinched almost imperceptibly. "I don't know anything. Truly. I'm an old woman with poor nerves." "And a very keen instinct," Tuppence countered kindly. "You've been uneasy since yesterday." The widow looked away. "It's nothing. Only the atmosphere. This hotel—" She hesitated. "It holds memories. Some pleasant, some less so." Tuppence leaned in. "Mrs. Montfort, please. We're trying to find out what happened to the gentleman who came to you last night." Mrs. Montfort froze. Tuppence pressed gently. "You weren't merely speaking with him. You were helping him." The widow's throat bobbed. Her eyes glistened. She looked down at her handbag as though expecting it to speak for her. "I did nothing wrong," she whispered. "I'm sure you didn't," Tuppence soothed. "But someone wanted whatever he had, whatever he entrusted you with." The widow shut her eyes. Her hand began to tremble. "Mrs. Montfort," Tuppence said softly, "if he was taken, you may be the last person he spoke to freely." The widow inhaled shakily. "You mustn't tell anyone," she murmured. "Anyone at all." Tuppence nodded. "I won't." For several long seconds the widow seemed to be fighting an internal struggle. When she finally opened her eyes, they were full of guilt and fear. "He asked me to keep something for him," she whispered. "A document." Tuppence's pulse quickened. "What kind of document?" Mrs. Montfort shook her head fiercely. "I can't say. I shouldn't have accepted it. He looked so desperate, and I—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought it harmless, but then someone came looking for it." "Who?" The widow's gaze darted across the room. "I don't know. I only know that someone knocked on my door late at night. When I didn't answer, they rattled the handle, hard." Tuppence's breath caught. "Did they get in?" No. I kept the extra lock engaged." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But I know they'll try again." "And this document, do you still have it?" Mrs. Montfort clutched her handbag more tightly. "Yes," she whispered. "For now." Before Tuppence could ask more, someone approached the coffee table, and the widow snapped upright, mask restored. "Please," Mrs. Montfort murmured urgently, "no more here." Tuppence nodded, rising with a polite smile that concealed her racing thoughts. She crossed the room to where Tommy stood in conversation with Gregory Vale. The pianist was pale, eyes shadowed, fingers twitching uncontrollably. He'd moved from the piano bench to the corner of the lounge, clearly too rattled to perform. Tommy's expression was carefully neutral. "Tuppence," he said softly, "Mr. Vale has something to tell us." Gregory Vale swallowed, looking around as though expecting someone to appear behind him at any moment. "I shouldn't say it," he whispered. "If anyone knows I said it, "We won't repeat your name," Tommy assured. "It won't matter," Vale murmured. "They'll know." "Who?" Tuppence asked. His hands clenched until the knuckles whitened. "The people who dragged him." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a look. Vale leaned closer, voice barely audible. "I saw them. The stranger. 2 men. The service corridor near the back stairs. I didn't mean to see it. I'd left the piano for some air. I thought no one would be there." "And who were they?" Tuppence pressed. "I can't." Vale shook his head violently. "I won't. I don't want to disappear. That's what happens. That's what he said would happen." Tommy placed a hand on Vale's arm. "Please, if we know who—" "No." Vale pulled back, trembling. "Don't ask again." He fled the room before either of them could stop him. Tuppence exhaled. "He's terrified." "Terrified enough that he's not lying," Tommy said grimly. 2 men dragged him. That much is clear. "And Mrs. Montfort knows something about why." Tommy nodded slowly. "You learned something." She told him quietly what the widow had confessed. Tommy's eyes sharpened. "A legal document. That's why he wanted us." "Yes," Tuppence said. "He never meant to meet us for our reputation alone. He needed us to expose something someone else desperately wants hidden." But before they could analyze further, a shrill mechanical wail sliced through the lounge. The fire alarm. It blared sharply and then, just as abruptly, cut off. The room erupted into confusion. Guests leapt to their feet. Newspapers fluttered to the floor. A waiter dropped a tray of teacups with a crash that scattered porcelain across the carpet. Tommy shouted above the noise, "Everyone stay calm!" But calm was the last thing anyone intended to do. Miss Dorling shrieked about smoke she imagined she saw. Dr. Kell tried to usher people toward the exit, though his movements looked more staged than sincere. Gregory Vale ducked behind the piano, desperate not to be noticed. Tuppence scanned the room automatically, searching for the widow. Mrs. Montfort stood frozen, clutching her handbag with white-knuckled desperation. Someone shoved past her in the commotion, bumping her arm. Her handbag slipped. It hit the floor, and in one split second, one frantic, scrambling second, a dozen people could have reached it. Tuppence lunged forward. Tommy followed. By the time she picked it up, the clasp was open. Mrs. Montfort gasped. "My bag! My bag! Someone touched it!" Tuppence checked inside. Her heart dropped. The legal document was gone. "Who took it?" Mrs. Montfort cried. "Who took it?" The lounge was in chaos, everyone jostling, talking, denying. Tommy scanned faces rapidly. Dr. Kell's expression was unreadable. Miss Dorling looked offended at the very idea she might be suspected. Gregory Vale trembled uncontrollably. The clerk hovered in the doorway, eyes darting like a cornered animal. 2 waiters whispered urgently. A maid stood pale and breathless with fear. Mrs. Montfort herself looked close to collapse, and every single one of them had been within reach of the bag when it fell. Tuppence closed the clasp gently. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "It's gone." Mrs. Montfort sank into a chair, face crumpling. "I knew it. I knew someone was watching me. I knew they were waiting." Tommy knelt beside her. "Please tell us what was in that document. Anything might help us find him." "No," Mrs. Montfort whispered, shaking her head. "I can't. If I speak, I won't survive this place." Tuppence put a steadying hand on the widow's shoulder. "You're safe with us." Mrs. Montfort gave a humourless laugh. "No one is safe here." Across the room, Miss Dorling shrieked again as if hoping panic would make her relevant. Dr. Kell attempted to restore order. The pianist continued shaking. A waiter argued with the clerk. Everyone seemed desperate to appear innocent or outraged or helpful. And Tuppence realised with creeping certainty every person in this room had touched that moment of chaos. Any of them could have taken the document. All of them had reason to fear what it contained. She moved to Tommy's side, voice low and steady. "The stranger didn't choose us for our fame. He chose us because he needed someone who wasn't involved." Tommy nodded grimly. "Someone who wouldn't bury him." Tuppence glanced at the doorway, where the clerk watched them from behind polished spectacles. Someone here had triggered the fire alarm. Someone had panicked the room deliberately. Someone had rifled through the widow's bag in the confusion. Someone now possessed the one thing the stranger had died, or vanished, trying to protect. Tuppence exhaled slowly, resolve tightening like a wire. "Tommy," she said quietly, "this hotel is a stage, and every single person in it is playing a part." Tommy nodded, eyes scanning the room. "And the villain," Tuppence added, "is hiding in plain sight." The lounge at the Souci never felt truly calm, but that afternoon it vibrated with a strange, brittle tension, the kind that settles when everyone believes something important is about to happen, and no one knows quite what. Tommy and Tuppence stood near the fireplace, pretending to examine a painting of a sailboat. In reality, they were whispering fiercely. "If the document was so valuable," Tommy murmured, "someone took a considerable risk stealing it." Tuppence nodded. "And whoever stole it expected chaos. The fire alarm ensured that." Tommy glanced around. "So who had both reason and opportunity?" "Everyone here," Tuppence said darkly, "but none equally." She stepped away from Tommy, smoothing her skirt, preparing for her performance. Tuppence had a flair for theatrics when necessary, and today it was necessary. She walked toward the centre of the lounge, where several guests lingered with nervous cups of tea. She cleared her throat politely, but with enough volume that heads turned. "Excuse me," she said brightly, "but I feel it only fair to tell everyone that the missing document contained the name of the villain." Half the room froze. Tuppence continued, tone confident, almost cheerful. "And the important thing is," she placed a hand on her hip, "they already know who it is." The effect was immediate and electric. Miss Dorling, who prided herself on her composure, let out a sharp gasp and dropped her teaspoon. It clattered loudly on her saucer. Her eyes bulged as she looked around in frantic disbelief. Then she stood abruptly, muttered something unintelligible, and stormed out of the lounge as if chased. Mrs. Montfort went white as paper. She clutched her pearls with a trembling hand and sank heavily into an armchair. Gregory Vale's fingers twitched violently. He attempted to stand, but stumbled, knocking into a small table. The pianist sat back down quickly, head bowed, as though hoping invisibility might come through sheer will. Dr. Rowan Kell stiffened, his jaw tightening. His posture sharpened sharply, too sharply. He stood with a defensive air, as though preparing to refute a charge not yet spoken. The reactions were fascinating, revealing, but most revealing of all was the only person who didn't react. The clerk. He stood at the reception desk, hands clasped, expression neutral, gaze steady, as unaffected as if Tuppence had announced the weather forecast. His lack of movement was almost eerie. He remained poised, polished, untouched by the waves of panic that rippled across the room. Tommy followed Tuppence's gaze. "That one," she murmured softly. "Watch him." Tommy nodded slowly. "He hasn't reacted at all, because he already knows everything," Tuppence whispered. They approached him with deliberate nonchalance. "Excuse me," Tommy said lightly. "May we have a word?" "Of course, sir," the clerk replied smoothly, folding his hands. "How may I assist?" Tuppence tilted her head. "The missing document has been causing quite a stir." His smile did not falter. "I'm afraid I know nothing about that." "Do you not?" she asked gently. "Not at all," he said, tone calm. "I only hope you find the culprit." "That would be easier," Tommy said mildly, "if the ledger hadn't been tampered with." There, the briefest flicker in the clerk's eyes, a faint hitch in his breath, almost imperceptible, but not to trained observers. "I beg your pardon?" he asked. Tuppence smiled. The page ripped out of the ledger, a rather unfortunate oversight. The clerk's face changed subtly, the mask slipping just enough to show a flash of irritation. "You shouldn't jump to conclusions," he said. "Ledger pages tear. They're old." "We never said the ripped page was old," Tommy replied gently. For the first time, the clerk's composure cracked. Only for a second, but a second was enough. He recovered instantly. "I meant," he said smoothly, "that paper wears down over time," but the slip had already spoken. Tuppence exchanged a triumphant glance with Tommy. "Interesting," she said, "because we never showed the ledger to anyone." The clerk opened his mouth, then closed it. A beat of silence passed between them. Then the clerk gave a polite, brittle smile and turned away. "If there is nothing further, I must attend to my duties." He walked off toward the private corridor behind the desk, with a pace just a shade too brisk. Tommy whispered, "We've rattled him." "And he's running," Tuppence replied softly. "We need to follow." They crossed the lobby swiftly, slipping through the gap in the counter where the clerk had disappeared. The private corridor stretched ahead, narrower, shabbier, its carpet thin and its walls lined with staff notices. They moved quickly but quietly, listening for footsteps. There, Tommy pointed toward the corner. A flicker of movement, the edge of a dark suit jacket swiftly turning down the stairwell. "He's going to the service stairs," Tuppence said. They hurried after him. But by the time they reached the top of the stairwell, the clerk was already halfway down, descending rapidly. "Stop!" Tommy called. The clerk did not stop. He vanished around the second landing. Tommy and Tuppence raced down the first flight, but a heavy metal door slammed somewhere below. When they reached the bottom, the corridor split into 3 directions: laundry, boiler room, and kitchen access. Empty. Tuppence swore under her breath, a soft, ladylike word, but heartfelt. "He knows this place," Tommy said. "He knows every shortcut." "But he left in a hurry," Tuppence replied. "He'll make mistakes." They searched the first corridor. Laundry carts lined the wall. The air smelled faintly of soap, steam, and starched linen. A cart sat oddly crooked, one wheel caught on the edge of a tile. Tommy nudged it aside. Something dark lay beneath it. Tuppence knelt first. Her breath hitched. "Tommy." She pulled the fabric out slowly. A coat. The stranger's coat, or what was left of it. The sleeve was torn exactly where they'd found the strip in the winter garden. The monogrammed button was missing, the twin of the one now in Tommy's pocket. Tommy crouched beside her. So he didn't walk away. He didn't slip out quietly. "No," Tuppence said softly. "He was dragged." She lifted the coat. It was damp along the hem, speckled with small crumbs of plaster. Tommy touched the collar. "Laundry chute?" Tuppence looked up at the wall, where a small square metal door was bolted shut. She stood and unlatched it. The chute gaped open, a deep metal shaft descending into the laundry basement. The faint smell of damp cloth rose from below. Tuppence held up the coat. "He fought," she murmured. "Someone tore it off when he struggled." "And threw it down the chute," Tommy said, "to hide it." "But why here? Why now?" Tuppence wondered aloud. "He's not sloppy." Tommy's voice lowered. "He panicked. We cornered him. We forced him to run." "And forced him to hide the last piece of evidence." Tuppence folded the coat carefully over her arm. "This means he knows we're onto him." Tommy nodded grimly. "And if he knows that," Tuppence finished the sentence quietly, "he'll try to stop us." They stepped back into the corridor. Footsteps echoed faintly from the far side of the wing, someone moving quickly, trying not to be heard. Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. "We're not the hunters anymore," she murmured. "We're the prey." Tommy straightened, jaw set. "We need to get back to the others. If the clerk is working alone, he'll strike soon. If he isn't, then the others are in danger," Tuppence said. They returned to the main floor, each step bringing new clarity. Tommy spoke quietly as they walked. "Let's reconstruct." The stranger checked in under a false name. The clerk removed the record. The stranger hid in the west wing. Someone assisted the clerk, or he cornered the stranger himself. Tuppence nodded. The fire alarm was another move. Distress the crowd, steal the document. "And whoever wanted that document," Tommy said, "now has it." Tuppence exhaled. The clerk had motive, opportunity, access, and he didn't panic when I said the document named the villain. "Because he already knew what was in it," Tommy said, "or feared it." They reached the lounge again and found it buzzing with whispers. Miss Dorling had returned, demanding smelling salts from a waiter. Dr. Kell leaned by the window with a sour expression. Mrs. Montfort sat hunched, clutching her empty handbag as though it might magically refill itself. Gregory Vale still trembled silently in his corner. They were all playing roles, but now Tommy and Tuppence knew which role mattered most. Tuppence stepped forward. "Everyone," she announced, "please remain where you are." The room went silent. Tommy moved to stand beside her, the stranger's coat draped over his arm. "We've identified the first person involved," Tommy said. Miss Dorling gasped. Vale flinched. Kell lifted his chin. Mrs. Montfort hid her face. But Tommy didn't look at any of them. He looked at the empty reception desk. Tuppence finished calmly. "The quietest person in the room." Tommy laid the coat on the writing desk as though handling the last remains of a man he had come to respect. Tuppence stood beside him, fingers tracing the torn sleeve. her expression a mix of sorrow and steely resolve. The lounge's distant murmurs drifted through the closed door, muted and fretful. The hotel was holding its breath. "Something's in this coat," Tommy murmured. "It's heavier than it should be." Tuppence nodded. The stranger went to great lengths to keep it with him. It must hold the last thread he had left. Tommy carefully examined the lining, running his hands along each seam. On the left interior side, his fingers paused. "There," he said quietly. Tuppence leaned in. A ridge beneath the silk lining. Small, hard, carefully concealed. Tommy gently tugged at a nearly invisible stitch line. With a soft tearing sound, the seam gave way. Inside the hidden pocket lay a tiny brass key, no larger than a postage stamp. Tuppence exhaled. A key. So he wasn't just hiding from someone. He was guarding something. Or someone was trying very hard to take it from him, Tommy said. He held it up to the light. Sturdy. Older than the hotel itself, perhaps. Not for a room, not for luggage. For a lock meant to stay hidden, Tuppence murmured. Tommy pocketed the key. Let's find out what it opens. The reading room of the Souci was quieter than usual, a hush deepened by the knowledge that something important had occurred just outside its walls. Rows of heavy bookcases lined the room, stuffed with faded hardbacks whose gilt titles had long since surrendered to time. A globe stood in the corner like a patient conspirator. Tuppence scanned the room. Look at the base of that bookcase. One shelf sat slightly raised, no more than an inch, but enough to catch the eye of someone attuned to secrets. Tommy knelt and inspected the wooden trim along the floor. Hidden beneath the decorative moulding was a small, square panel. "It's a safe," he whispered, "built right into the bookcase." Tuppence checked the corridor, empty, then quietly closed the reading room door. "Try the key," she said. Tommy inserted the brass key into the keyhole concealed under the moulding. It turned with a definitive metallic click. The hidden panel loosened. Tommy pulled open the small safe. Inside lay a manila folder, a stack of thin receipts bound by a rubber band, and a carefully folded legal document with several notary stamps. Tuppence's breath caught. The missing document. Tommy opened the folder first, revealing a typed report stamped with an audit seal. "A financial inspection," Tommy said slowly. "Dated 2 years ago." Tuppence scanned the lines. Unauthorized withdrawals, irregular bookkeeping, misappropriated funds. "And look at the signature," Tommy murmured. At the bottom of the report, signed Charles Lennox Hotel Clerk, Souci Hotel, Tuppence slammed her palms softly onto the edge of the bookcase. He forged the books, embezzled money, and the stranger uncovered it. Tommy grabbed the receipts next. These proved the withdrawals weren't for hotel maintenance. He funneled the funds into a private account. And the legal document, Tuppence unfolded it. Her eyes widened. "A will," she whispered. "Mrs. Montfort's late husband's will." Tommy leaned over her shoulder. The language was clear. A portion of an estate, a substantial portion, was to go to an unnamed beneficiary listed only as C.L. Tuppence stared. C.L. Charles Lennox, the clerk. Her husband left something valuable to him, Tommy said. But Lennox must have destroyed any evidence that could expose him, except this document survived. Tuppence laid the will gently on the desk. Mrs. Montfort didn't know, or perhaps she suspected something was wrong. That's why she gave it to the stranger. Tommy frowned. But why would the stranger care? Tuppence opened the typed report again. Because he wasn't a drifter at all. He was an investigator. Tommy nodded. He came here pretending to be harmless. He sniffed around. He found the forgery. Maybe Mrs. Montfort confided in him. And when Lennox realized it, Tuppence whispered, he tried to buy him off. Tommy added, grim, then frightened him, then abducted him, and when the stranger escaped briefly, he reached out to us. Tuppence shivered. We were his last resort. They folded the documents carefully and slipped them back into the coat. Tuppence looked at the key in Tommy's hand. "We need everyone present," she said. "No more secrets." The lounge erupted the moment they entered. Miss Dorling was threatening to faint. Dr. Kell paced with irritation. Vale trembled in his armchair. Mrs. Montfort clung to her empty bag as though trying to restore its contents by sheer will. Tommy raised a hand. "Please, quiet." Silence descended like a stage curtain. Tuppence stepped forward. "We have found the document." Mrs. Montfort gasped. Miss Dorling shrieked. Dr. Kell swore softly under his breath. Tommy held up the coat, the stranger's final message to the world. "This," Tommy said, "was hidden inside the lining." He drew out the will. Mrs. Montfort burst into tears. "I knew it! I knew something was wrong." Tuppence addressed the room. "This will concerns Mrs. Montfort's late husband. It names an additional beneficiary, someone who ensured that this information never saw daylight." She paused. "The hotel clerk." A collective gasp rippled through the room like electricity. Mrs. Montfort sobbed harder. "My husband trusted him with everything. Everything," Miss Dorling sputtered. "The clerk? That quiet little man?" Gregory Vale whispered. "God help us." Dr. Kell's eyes narrowed with cold calculation. "I knew he was hiding something." Tommy held up the typed financial report. This was the stranger's discovery. Lennox embezzled funds. The will would give cause for investigation. He panicked. Tuppence continued, voice steady and cutting. The stranger uncovered everything. Lennox tried to silence him, first with threats, then with violence. Mrs. Montfort whispered, "Did he kill him?" Tommy shook his head. "We don't know, not yet. But we do know he dragged him away." Vale saw it. Lennox wiped the ledger. Lennox removed the telephone connections. Lennox used the fire alarm to steal the will. "And Lennox," Tuppence said, eyes blazing, "is still in this hotel." A murmur spread through the guests like wind through dry leaves. Tuppence pointed toward the service corridor. "He fled down there." Tommy added, "He can't have gone far." They moved through the staff corridors in a tense procession. Tommy leading, Tuppence beside him, Dr. Kell trailing with stiff suspicion, Miss Dorling muttering prayers under her breath, Gregory Vale trembling, and Mrs. Montfort tottering bravely with her empty handbag pressed to her chest. At the end of the corridor, the heavy metal door to the boiler room stood ajar. A faint clank echoed within. Tommy signalled silence. They stepped inside the boiler room, a cavern of iron pipes, hissing valves, and the deep, steady thrum of machinery. Near the back wall, half hidden behind a cylinder tank, crouched the clerk, Charles Lennox. His suit was rumpled, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His eyes darted like a cornered animal's. Tuppence stepped forward. "Mr. Lennox." He flinched. "Stay back." Tommy raised his hands calmly. "We know everything. Running won't help." Lennox laughed, a brittle, desperate sound. "Everything. No. You don't know anything. You don't know what he planned to do to me." Tuppence's voice softened. "The stranger came here for the truth. That's all." Lennox shook his head, trembling violently. "He was going to ruin me, my life, my position, all because of one mistake." Tommy stepped forward. "You stole from the hotel." Lennox's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to. I needed the money. Her husband promised to help me. He said I'd inherit something. But after he died, nothing. He lied. And when Mrs. Montfort found the will, I thought—" His voice spiraled into panic. "I thought she would expose me. I couldn't let it happen." "So you tried to bribe the stranger," Tuppence said. "Yes," Lennox cried. I begged him to listen, but he wouldn't drop it. He kept asking questions, he kept digging. He said he would go to the authorities." Mrs. Montfort whispered, "So you kidnapped him?" Lennox pressed his hands to his temples. "I didn't. I only meant to frighten him, to make him leave, to make him forget what he'd seen." Tommy's voice hardened. "But he didn't forget." Lennox squeezed his eyes shut. "He ran. I chased him. He tripped in the service corridor. He fought. I only dragged him to stop him shouting. I swear it. He was alive when I left him." Silence filled the room. Thick, heavy, Tuppence's voice was barely audible. "Where is he now?" Lennox swallowed. "I don't know. He escaped again. Someone else must have found him. Someone else must have taken him." Tommy exchanged a slow, grim look with Tuppence. Someone else. Someone the stranger feared. Someone besides Lennox. Tuppence stepped closer. "You're lying." But Lennox shook his head desperately. "No, I swear it. I swear it on everything I have left. I didn't kill him." Tommy stared at him, expression unreadable. The clerk's voice dropped to a broken whisper. "I never meant to kill him," he said. "He was alive when I left him." The echo of those words lingered in the boiler room long after he stopped speaking, a chilling confession and a terrifying revelation. Someone else had taken the stranger, someone far more dangerous, someone still among them. The Souci had settled into an uneasy hush, the kind that falls when a confession has been made but the story remains incomplete. The boiler room confrontation left every guest rattled. Even Dr. Kell looked pale, and Miss Dorling's dramatic sniffles could be heard echoing down the corridor. The pianist sat trembling near the lounge piano, hands wrung tight as though afraid any moment might reveal his sins. Tommy and Tuppence remained in the lobby, gathering their thoughts. The fire crackled gently in the grate, its warmth unable to dispel the cold apprehension clinging to the air. "We're missing something," Tuppence whispered. "Yes," Tommy said quietly. Lennox admitted to dragging him, but not to killing him. "And surprisingly," Tuppence continued, "I believed him." Tommy nodded. "So did I. He's desperate, frightened, but not murderous." Before they could pursue the thought further, the front doors burst open. A gust of cold sea air swept through the lobby, and with it came two men. One was a burly fisherman in a weather-beaten coat, cap pulled low. The other leaned heavily against him, staggering, grey-faced, clothing torn, eyes barely open. Tuppence's hand flew to her mouth. "Tommy!" Tommy surged forward. "It's him!" The stranger, alive, barely, but undeniably alive. The fisherman hauled him inside gently. "Found him by the pier," he said in a thick accent. "Collapsed behind me boat shed. Thought at first he were drunk till I saw the state of him." The stranger croaked. "Not drunk, hiding." Tuppence guided him to a nearby settee. "You're safe now." His eyes flickered from her to Tommy. Recognition lit them faintly. "You came." "Of course we did," Tuppence said softly. "Now tell us everything." The guests, drawn by instinct, quietly gathered around. Mrs. Montfort, Miss Dorling, Vale, Dr. Kell, and even the trembling clerk escorted under guard by two hotel porters. Tension thickened the air, but nobody dared interrupt. The stranger sank into the cushions, breath trembling. His voice was raspy but determined. "I came here because of Mrs. Montfort," he said. "She didn't know it, but her husband entrusted me with information years ago, information about the Souci. He suspected someone inside was forging financial documents. I told her I would look into it after his death." Mrs. Montfort gasped. "He never told me anything of the sort." "He didn't want to worry you," the stranger said softly. "You'd been ill. He believed you protected here." The irony cut through the room like a knife. "When I arrived," the stranger continued, "I knew immediately the clerk was involved. He recognized me, though I came as a drifter, a harmless wanderer. But someone else recognized me too." His gaze swept the room. Tommy leaned forward. "Who?" The stranger looked at Gregory Vale. The pianist's hands shook as though a tremor had seized him. "No," Vale whispered. "No, please." "It was you," the stranger said gently but firmly. "You warned the clerk that I was looking into things." Vale shook his head wildly. I had no choice." "What did he have over you?" Tuppence asked. Vale's voice cracked. "Debts. Gambling debts. He helped me settle them, but then said he'd expose me if I didn't do what he asked. He said I didn't belong with people like you." He choked on the last word. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt." The stranger nodded faintly. "Vale told Lennox I was investigating. That's when the threats began. I tried to warn Mrs. Montfort. She trusted me with the will, the only evidence proving that her husband had intended to expose Lennox by naming him as a beneficiary. Lennox feared it would lead authorities straight to his embezzlement." Mrs. Montfort sobbed. "I should never have opened my door to you. I put you in danger." "No," the stranger said gently. "Your husband trusted me. You did what you felt right." He exhaled shakily. "I tried to escape, but Lennox cornered me. There was a struggle. I managed to slip away through the maintenance passage. I thought I'd buy time." Tommy frowned. "But he said he left you alive." "He did," the stranger whispered, "but he wasn't alone." A murmur rippled through the room. Tuppence sat straighter. Someone else helped him. "Yes," the stranger whispered. "Someone who used the panic to their advantage. Someone who wanted the will even more desperately than Lennox." Tommy's eyes narrowed. "Who?" The stranger's gaze turned toward the pianist, but then moved past him, toward the far corner, where Miss Dorling stood, She froze, not dramatically this time, not with theatrical flair, but with a stillness so sudden and rigid it was more telling than any gasp. The stranger closed his eyes briefly. Miss Dorling knew the Montfort family well. She knew of the will's existence long before I did. She knew it threatened her own arrangement. "Lies!" Miss Dorling screamed, but her voice wavered. Tommy stepped closer. "Arrangement?" Tuppence's eyes widened. She was Mrs. Montfort's companion for years, and housekeeper before that. She handled correspondence, including legal letters. Mrs. Montfort looked stricken. "Angelica, you were paid generously after my husband's death. You told me he left something for you." Miss Dorling's mask cracked. "I deserved it. I worked like a servant for 20 years. That miser of a man promised to take care of me, promised me a future. Instead, he left everything to charity and to you." Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "But the clerk, the pathetic little clerk, he was easier to manipulate. I told him the will must be destroyed. He did the dirty work. I waited for the right moment." Tommy's jaw tightened. "You triggered the fire alarm." "Of course I did," she snapped. "Panic makes thieves invisible." Tuppence stared at her. "You stole the will and left the stranger to die." "No," Miss Dorling cried. "I didn't touch him. I only wanted the document." The fool clerk panicked and the pianist whimpered like a child. "None of them could do anything right," the stranger interrupted softly. "She was there when I ran. It was her silhouette at the end of the passage. She slammed the door. I heard her say, 'Let him rot.'" Gasps rippled around the room. Mrs. Montfort burst into tears. Miss Dorling trembled, but it was fury now, not fear. "I did what I deserved. I did what should have been mine." Tuppence stepped forward, her voice a whip. "You nearly killed an innocent man. You manipulated the clerk, used Vale's weakness, terrified Mrs. Montfort, and tried to misdirect us at every turn." Miss Dorling's eyes flashed. Then she lunged. Tommy caught her by the wrist before she got 2 steps. "I don't think so," he said calmly. At that moment, 2 officers entered the hotel, summoned earlier by the porter during the boiler room confrontation. Inspector Langley approached. "Everything all right here?" Tommy gestured to Lennox and Miss Dorling. "These 2 have much to answer for." The inspector took one look at the stranger's battered state and nodded grimly. "We'll take statements." Miss Dorling tried to speak, to twist the narrative one last time, but Vale's sobbing confession cut her off. "I helped them," he cried. "I didn't want to. I never wanted." "It's over," Tuppence said firmly. The officers escorted all 3 culprits, Lennox, Miss Dorling, and the shaking pianist, from the room. The guests watched in a stunned mixture of pity, revulsion, and exhausted relief. As the police took statements, Tommy and Tuppence slowly, carefully reconstructed the entire chain of events in classic detective fashion. The stranger arrived under cover, already suspecting fraud. Lennox panicked, having forged documents for years. Miss Dorling encouraged the clerk, concerned the will threatened her secret payments. Gregory Vale, indebted and terrified, served as reluctant lookout. The stranger found the will, hidden among Mrs. Montfort's belongings. Lennox attacked him, trying to silence him. The stranger escaped, leaving scraps of evidence behind. He sought Tommy and Tuppence, knowing they would understand. Miss Dorling stole the will, using the fire alarm as cover. The clerk hid the coat, convinced the stranger was dead. The stranger collapsed near the pier, found by a fisherman. Every thread, every motive, every lie, revealed. The lounge slowly emptied as police and guests drifted away. Only Tommy, Tuppence, and the stranger remained. Tuppence sat beside him. "You're safe now," he gave a tired smile. "Because you came." "Because you asked," Tommy replied. Outside, seagulls cried over the water. The Souci felt different now, lighter, as though the secrets had been scraped from its walls. Tuppence leaned back with a sigh. "I knew this holiday would be trouble." Tommy chuckled softly. "I should have booked that quiet cottage by the sea." She smiled at him. "Next time?" He grinned. "Next time." Morning light filtered through the thin lace curtains of the Beresfords' room, dancing gently across half-packed suitcases and the rumpled clothes Tuppence insisted she had just been deciding between. The Souci, despite its peeling edges and theatrical eccentricities, seemed quieter now, as though relieved to have its secrets dragged out into the open and aired like laundry on a breezy day. Tommy folded a shirt with the seriousness of a man performing battlefield surgery. "I suppose," he said, "that this brings our complimentary weekend to a dignified close." Tuppence glanced over her shoulder, eyes sparkling. "Dignified? We've had abductions, confessions, attempted arson of important documents, multiple lies, and more trembling piano players than I ever want to encounter again." Tommy closed the suitcase with a sigh. "And you're pleased about it?" She pretended offense. "I am not pleased. I am intellectually satisfied." He arched an eyebrow. "Which is Tuppence speak for, I told you trouble was brewing the moment the invitation arrived." "Well," she said with a modest shrug, "it was wrapped in mystery, Tommy. What was I supposed to think? That it was merely generous?" Tommy walked to the window, looking down into the courtyard below where staff moved briskly, restoring the hotel's interrupted rhythm. "The Souci looks almost normal this morning," he observed. "Almost," Tuppence repeated softly. There was a tentative knock on their door. Mrs. Montfort entered, gloved, composed, and carrying an envelope with more reverence than she had once given her pearls. Her eyes were warmer now, touched with relief. "My dears," she said, "I wanted to thank you both before you leave. You have saved more than my husband's name. You saved me." Tuppence squeezed her hand. "We simply followed the loose threads." "And found far more than I ever expected." Mrs. Montfort swallowed. "I owe you a proper holiday, one without danger lurking behind ornamental palms." Tommy paled. "That won't be necessary." "Nonsense," she said firmly, pressing the envelope into his hands. "It's a voucher for a week at a quiet countryside inn. No seaside cliffs, no suspicious clerks, no piano players. Only peaceful gardens and trustworthy chickens." "Chickens can be treacherous," Tommy muttered, but he accepted it graciously. Mrs. Montfort smiled at them both. "Goodbye, and bless you." When she left, Tommy held the envelope at arm's length as though it might explode. "We are not going." Tuppence laughed. "We shall see." Another knock. This one softer, hesitant. The stranger stood in the doorway. He looked better, freshly bandaged, hair brushed, a borrowed coat too large in the shoulders, but his face still bore the exhaustion of a man who had run too far, hidden too long, and come too close to losing everything. Yet his eyes had regained their quiet steadiness. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Properly this time, before I go." "No need," Tommy replied. "We're very glad you survived to thank us." "I'm alive because two strangers believed me," he said. "Not many would." Tuppence gave him a warm smile. "You chose the right two." The stranger held out his hand. Tommy shook it. Then Tuppence. His grip trembled slightly, but the gratitude in his expression was solid. "I'll disappear for a while," he said. "Back to anonymity. I think I've had enough excitement for one life." "Do disappear somewhere restful," Tuppence said. "Preferably where hotel ledgers are nothing more than ledgers." A rare smile touched the stranger's lips. "Goodbye." He slipped down the corridor with the quiet grace of a man who had spent too long trying not to be seen. Tommy exhaled. "Well, we should leave before someone else knocks with a confession." They finished packing, descended the grand staircase, and stepped into the lobby for the final time. It was almost unrecognizable. Guests lounged with newspapers and gossip, but now their voices were soft with ordinary chatter, weather, meals, plans for afternoon walks. The staff moved with renewed confidence, no longer glancing over their shoulders. Even the potted palms seemed less sinister. "It's charming again," Tuppence observed as they walked across the marble floor, "now that no one is being dragged around it." Tommy gave her a sideways glance. "I'm never going near a winter garden again." "Don't be dramatic," she said lightly. "I'm serious. Unless the flowers come with sworn character references, I'm staying out." She patted his arm. "We'll find you a safe environment, a nice, harmless inn." "With chickens?" Tommy asked, grim. "With chickens," she confirmed, "but friendly ones." He held up the envelope from Mrs. Montfort. "I refuse to believe any holiday voucher given to us voluntarily can be safe. It's a trap." "Oh, Tommy," she said, laughing, "you'd rather stay home." "With locked doors," he agreed. "And miss a perfectly good adventure," she teased. "We've just had an adventure," he protested, "and nearly ended up sleeping in the laundry chute with the stranger's coat." But where, she said, eyes shining with mischief, would be the fun in avoiding trouble? He stopped walking. Normal people do avoid trouble. Yes, she replied wistfully. And what dull lives they must lead. He shook his head, half smiling. I should have married a quiet librarian. You'd have been bored out of your mind, she said without missing a beat. Possibly. Certainly. Tuppence pushed open the front doors and the brisk air rushed in, not ominous now, but pleasantly invigorating. They stepped out onto the gravel drive, their suitcases trailing behind them, the Souci rising elegant and charming behind them once more. The sign creaked lazily overhead as though waving them off. Goodbye, you theatrical old place, Tuppence murmured. Tommy glanced back. Do you think it will stay out of trouble now? Hotels have memories, Tuppence said softly, but they also have guests, and guests tend to bring trouble with them. Meaning us. Meaning everyone, she corrected. We just happened to notice it first. He took her arm as they began walking toward the taxi. Next time we book the cottage, by the sea, with no more than 2 neighbours, and not a single pianist in sight. Agreed, she said sweetly. He brightened. Truly? Her grin widened. Absolutely not, Tommy groaned. Of course. Their playful bickering carried down the drive as the taxi driver stepped out to load their luggage. Behind them, the Souci stood tall and still, its windows glinting in the sunlight, innocent once more, or pretending to be. Tuppence paused before getting into the taxi, casting one last thoughtful look at the eccentric hotel. It really does look peaceful, she said. Tommy remarked dryly, That's exactly how places look before we arrive. She laughed, stepped into the taxi, and reached for his hand. Come along, Tommy. There are more mysteries in the world than this old place, and we're frightfully good at finding them. Don't remind me, he muttered. The driver shut the boot and slid behind the wheel. As the taxi pulled away, leaving the Souci shrinking behind them, the Beresfords settled back in their seats, warm, alive, triumphant, a pair of adventurers who never quite managed the quiet holiday they planned, but who always left the world a little tidier than they found it. And inside the lobby, long after their departure, the walls seemed to whisper with the echo of their laughter.